Hi, my name is Vishal Marria and I'm the CEO and founder here at Quantexa. I'm delighted to welcome today Dr. Anthony Scriffignano, who's the Chief Data Scientist from Dun & Bradstreet. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much. It's great to spend time with you again.
Thank you, Anthony. Anthony, we've been working together as a partners between Quantexa and Dun & Bradstreet for quite some time. And I've always really appreciated your wisdom, your thoughts, and some of your views around the emerging trends around data, analytics, machine learning, AI. So I'm delighted today you've taken some time out. It's going to be an action-packed session. So thank you, Anthony.
Not at all. You know, we're living in a time where we all have to challenge how we think about these things with everything that's going on. So I'm glad we're able to spend this time together.
And Anthony, look, not to take too much time around the pandemic, because we could probably spend the next, few days talking about how things have changed with regards to digital resilience, the digital transformation, and the role that data plays in such a thing. But one thing I would say, from the experiences I've had with a few of our clients, more and more of our clients are adopting data analytics at the center of all their business decision making, which is fantastic, and it's fantastic to see. But from your perspective and some of your clients, what do you see as some of the challenges that they are going through with regards to data, around getting data in either a cloud deployment or on-prem deployment? What do you foresee as some of those challenges today?
Well, there's so many, and especially in the context of the disruption that's going on, it's important that we think about, I always say, don't lead with the data. Of course we need data. Of course we need the right analytics, but you don't normally want to start there. So one of the biggest challenges in any kind of data science problem is when the environment is changing faster than the data that describes that environment. And that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. So we have to be very careful about what data we bring into the corpus of data from which we are drawing this analytic insight. What sorts of bias are in there? How do we know that the decisions that we're making are within the envelope of elasticity that's appropriate, that we wouldn't make a different decision if we just had more data? Some very big questions that we're all challenged with right now.
And I totally agree. And I think the elasticity of the data, as you phrase it, is a fantastic view of looking at that, because sometimes people think more data is the better. But if you've got more bad quality data that's coming through the pipe, if anything, you could be compounding your problem upstream when you're coming down to those business decision making.
Absolutely. Sometimes even if you have more good quality data, the size of the haystack, one of the biggest dangers in data science is something called confirmation bias, where you find data that supports what you believe to be true rather than asking a question and finding the answer. The more data you have, the more likely you are to find something that supports what you think is the answer. So it's very important to get the right problem formulation, to get the right analytic methods. There's no magic button that we can just press, pour the data in, press that magic button and get the answer. We have to ask the right question, and we have to use the right methods in order to get there. It's super important.
And I think, Anthony, you brought the two together, right? So just doing data analysis paralysis without having the exam question is obviously one of the critical success criteria. And also, if you don't get that right, can absolutely be the Achilles heel of any data or digital transformation that any of our clients will be going through today. What is the question you're trying to answer from the data?
For sure. I use as an example very often, those that know me are probably tired of hearing this, but it's important. We think about truth in data. When we ingest data, we assume our machine learning models and our analytics assume it's all true. Well, it may be all true when we consume it, but not all true data is simultaneously true. So think about what we've learned right now in the pandemic and things that we thought were true then and know are not true now. There's a reason why in court we swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Those are three different things. So just this simple idea of bring a bunch of data in that we know is correct and true and current, and then make some kind of decision on it. The date of curation and the date of creation are different. The reasons that make it true have changed. All of these things have to be considered. And at the same time, you mentioned analysis paralysis. You also have to realize that you need to make a decision sort of in this lifetime, right? So you have to be able to move fast enough to make a decision that's useful and slow enough to make a decision that's defendable. And that's a very interesting challenge.
No, I completely agree, Anthony. And I think, if you look at coming back to the rationale and the reason why we're doing this, is for making those better decisions. If that's onboarding a customer, if that's looking at a new product for an existing customer, if that's to manage the risk of the customer as they're onboarded, again, the data and the analysis, without understanding what we're trying to answer and bringing that all together, then we will just end up, for our lifetimes doing analysis.
If you think about just what's going on right now around the world, we look at businesses. Most businesses in the world are small. Most small businesses are busy trying to stay in business, not busy telling the world how big they are or how many employees they have, or whether or not they're still in business, whether or not their address has changed. Yeah, all of that's important. But many businesses right now, it's more important to just breathe in, breathe out, move forward. How do you know who's still around? How do you know whether businesses are committing fraud? How do you know whether their identity has been stolen? All of these sorts of fungible questions at the edge of what might have been true are really at the center right now of what might be causing massive loss of opportunity. And unfortunately, the growth of any country is its small and medium enterprise. If we don't help those small and medium enterprises, then we are exacerbating this problem that we're all facing.
And you touched upon it earlier, and at this junction as well. If you're trying to apply your analysis on past data, you're only going to be able to predict what the past taught us. Now, if we look at today through this pandemic, you can't look at 12 months ago company accounts information at an SME or because the world has changed so much in the last 12 months. How can you predict if this is a good company or a genuine company, or if this is a fraudulent company, by looking at past it? Because the world has changed so much in the last 12, the anniversary of the pandemic, especially here in the UK, was this weekend. So if we look at the 12 months of any company, if it's large or small or medium, they have fundamentally changed in the last 12 months. So how do organizations can adopt and be agile, as they still need to continue to do business today, but you need more up-to-date data, right? That's going to be a key challenge for most of these organizations.
Someone was telling me a story the other day about ice fishing, and they were saying that they live on a lake, and people go out on the lake and they cut a hole in the ice and they fish, and it's partially an excuse for fishing and partially an excuse for drinking and just having fun, right? And sometimes they catch certain fish that they don't like, and that they aren't good eating fish. And it's kind of cruel, but instead of throwing the fish back in the water, they throw the fish on the ice, and then birds come down and feed on the fish that are lying on top of the frozen ice. Kind of barbaric. But think about it from the perspective of the fish. One day you're swimming along, everything's fine. The next minute you're hooked. The next minute the water's frozen. The next minute, just when you think things can't get worse, a bird comes down. That's kind of what's going on right now. So we can certainly learn from the past, but we have to be very careful when we define ourselves only by the past. Most of us drive cars. I've learned certain things about driving cars. I've learned that children run out in front of you with a ball. I know to be aware of that. I know that there can be ice. I know that certain things happen when you're driving. Something can go wrong with the car. So I've learned from all of that. And I expect that some of that might happen in the future. So I can certainly be informed by dangers from the past. But then the road in front of me doesn't necessarily look like the road behind me. Imagine I get on a plane and I go from where I live to where you live. The road's a little bit different. I have to drive on the other side of the road. And, there's some different changes that might be important in order for me to survive. Our brains are very well suited to recognizing difference and to incorporating that difference into the mental model that we have, so that we learn from the past, but we are not defined by the past. There are data science methods that do exactly the same thing. And we need to use more of those methods that are not bound by the past, but informed by the past. This is absolutely something that's within our capability if we remember to do it.
Spot on. And I won't debate with you who drives on the wrong side or the right side of the road between our two great nations, but we will quickly move on from there. But if I come back to, again, things around data science, data analytics, and so on, when you look at data, if the quality of the data is incomplete, or if the quality of the data is not to the standards to make those models or scenarios, then obviously the old saying, garbage in is garbage out, yeah? But one thing we have seen here at Quantexa, and we again work with many of our shared clients today, building that context between your internal and external data, building that view of the data that can almost complete data streams together, both from upstream systems with clients as well as external data such as yourself. That context really can support and enable people to make those better decisions. If it's around credit or onboarding or KYC or fraud detection, understanding who your customer is, their counterparties, understanding the context of their network and their footprint in that data becomes quite critical. What is some of your views and some of your experiences of how do people are piecing data together to make those better decisions?
So if you think about the use cases that you just talked about, onboarding and KYC, those are sort of similar use cases. When you onboard a customer, you need to understand them and be compliant with the various laws. But then there are other use cases like sales and marketing or maybe fraud detection, which are different. So it's the first thing is to really get that problem set right, to get that context of the data acquisition, if you will, and that context of the data inquisition correct. The second thing, I find it's always very helpful to think about three corpora of data. There's the data that you have in hand or that you can easily get in hand. And you mentioned the data that might be within an enterprise and maybe available to the partners that they're working with. Think of all of that as data on hand. And then there's the data that's extant that you haven't gotten yet. And it has a cost in terms of time, in terms of money, maybe in terms of opportunity cost of doing something else. So you always have to be able to defend where you stopped acquiring data. By what right did you stop before the next most valuable piece of data that you didn't consume? There's a third corpus of data, which is the data that you know exists that you will never have access to. So in our case, it might be private covenants, it might be documents that describe conditions for breach, things like that. We probably will not have access to that. Thinking about the data in hand, the data that's available that you don't have yet, and the data that exists that you are never going to have to make a decision. You can then assess the value and size of each of those universes of data to the problem that you're trying to solve. If we're trying to go to Mars, most of the data is data that we don't have yet. It exists and it's not available. So we need to take extra precautions. We need to be extra safe. We need to prepare a lot more. If we're trying to go down the block, most of the data is available. We don't even need to get new data. So position yourself in which type of problem are you trying to solve and be realistic about the elasticity that's introduced by the data you don't have. That's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give.
No, spot on. And I think that's some great learnings there.
And if we look at some of those edge cases, right? So things like data lineage, transparency, as we know from our past, right, getting a model through model risk governance, if you're looking at from a risk point of view or a financial crime point of view, things such as transparency becomes even more, and the lineage of that data becomes even more important points to clarify. And also things around movement of data. Certain countries and certain jurisdictions, and even sometimes in a large complex organization, certain lines of business, you cannot move that data around. So how do you overcome some of those challenges, especially when you're doing it at a core level, when you need those for those business decisions?
Yeah, and I noticed that you used the word overcome. I always make the distinction between the can we do this and the should we do this, right? Yeah. So sometimes there are ways to deal with anonymized data that allow us to cluster it, for example, which is partially de-anonymizing it, right? You're very close to the edge of what you should be doing when you start doing things like that. So we have to be careful that as the capability of artificial intelligence and the capabilities of high-performance computing continue to advance, that we constantly challenge the ethical boundaries of what we're doing and not just do what's possible but what's appropriate for the case. The other thing to keep in mind is that regulators are not some force to be reckoned with that are like a headwind. I often say, I'm a scuba diver, that regulator is pretty important. It keeps your lungs from blowing up. We need regulation, but we need the right regulation. And innovation will always be in front of regulation. So there will always be things that we should be careful. Just because they're possible doesn't mean they're the smartest thing to do from a brand recognition standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, from a empirical rigor, being able to reproduce what you did. These are all very important frames that really must be considered.
And again, so some of those challenges around AI and true AI, being able to come up with the same decision or the same outcome again becomes even more of a challenge today, especially when you're trying to understand, is this a suspicion or not? And you need to replicate that again on the same data. Sometimes you might not get the same outcomes.
So it's often impossible with really complicated systems. We talk about explainable AI as if that term were even explainable, but sometimes we wouldn't even understand the explanation because literally thousands of potential methods were available at that moment. These are non-deterministic processes. They don't do the same thing every time. They do the best thing every time, and the conditions change. So empirical rigor is being challenged right now. Imagine some of the court cases that are going on. What was available to the machine, by what algorithms were used, what methods were used. There's a reason why human eyewitness testimony is not considered very reliable. When we go back and try to rationalize what we were thinking at the time that we did something, we have the benefit of having had time to think about what we think we were thinking. It's the same problem with AI, only times several orders of magnitude. Trying to go back and explain what was going on, if the systems are built that way to be interrogated, can be made easier, but in certain methods, it's very close to the point where the humans really wouldn't be able to understand the answer that well. So we start to say, can we audit? Can we prove that you didn't do this? Or can we prove that the data didn't exceed these boundaries, or that this type of data wasn't available in the decision? So we change the way we ask the question to turn it into something that can be answered.
So as we sort of look forward, we again, in our respective organizations, more and more our clients at the C-suite are putting data at the center of their decision-making process around how they run their business. They are allowing the data to speak. What are some of the, I would say, advantages that those C-suite could be looking at from a data point of view to help on the bottom line, but also help on the top line? Because many organizations now, as we come through the pandemic, as we get through this period of our lives, there's going to be a lot of focus around cost reduction, automation, and so on. But there's going to be a huge focus right on the top line. How do we grow the business? How do we get back to the growth agenda? How do you see data and tech playing in that, both that growth side, but also on the cost side?
I think for the C-suite, probably the most important realization is that we're not going to come back to some new normal that looks like the old normal. There's been hyper disruption. This isn't just a pandemic that happened. It's a pandemic that happened amidst social unrest, amidst Brexit, amidst regime changes, amidst trade deal renegotiations. All of these things are happening. They're not happening in one place at one time. They're happening everywhere. And so what's been happening, in my opinion, over the last 9 or so months is an increased focus on, if I don't understand what's going on in business, because there's no historical precedent to this, give me some data. Bring me the data that tells me the truth. And if I'm sitting in that boardroom where I'm trying to make a decision that's either going to be focused on total risk or total opportunity, or some combination of both. I either want to grow my company, or I want to protect my company from dying, or I want to understand who my next best customers are. I want to understand the impact of a change in something like the gig economy that we couldn't even define not too long ago. All of these are very big questions, and the people that we're asking to bring the data are probably not satisfying us. They're probably bringing us little pieces of data. We probably feel very unrequited in our requests. And we probably feel like, gee, if they would only bring us the right data, we could make a decision here. The first reality is that this is not one decision. This is a continuous stream of decisions that are going to have to be made in this new normal. We are going to have to be more agile with data. We're going to have to learn to be comfortable with where we keep the data, by what right are we allowed to use the data. We're going to have to be comfortable with not having all of the data. We're going to have to challenge some of the shamans that come with analytic methods that assume that they have all the data when we know that they don't. It's a new set of skills, and it's a new set of skills across the organization, including the C-suite, to think about problem formulation, to think about methodological rigor, to think about permissible use. All of these ethical considerations are part of the milieu right now. They're not a nice to have, they're a must have if you want to thrive and survive.
And do you see those organizations who adopt the data strategy, adopt the whole piece around digital transformation, bringing data to the core, will have a competitive edge as we come through the pandemic and out of the pandemic? And it's probably a $1 million, if not $1 billion question. How much is that edge going to be worth? What will be the length, the longevity of that edge? Because from a purist and from a data standpoint, if we can make those better decisions in a competitive market, I have an edge then, right? But
Sure.
How long will that edge be on my side?
Well, there's evidence to suggest that there's enough learning in the system now that the knowledge advantage is shorter and shorter. The information is more ubiquitous now. The data, at least, is more ubiquitous now. And so it doesn't mean that we all have access to the same data, but it means we all have access to much more of the data. There's very little data arbitrage, if you will. Now, there's examples where that's not true if you're in certain markets, if you're in certain parts of the world, if you're in certain industries. But by and large, we can all, nobody is saying, please, if I only had more data and nothing else, I'd be fine. There's more to it than that. There's data, again, metadata, I guess, to suggest that the rate at which the amount of data on Earth is increasing can no longer be measured. That it's just, let it go. It's hypergeometric, and there's always going to be more data than yesterday, and move on. So, yeah, it's partly about the data, but it's also about the mindset of being able to be more elastic in our decisions, to make decisions more quickly, to revisit those decisions, to understand what conditions might have to change in order for us to come back and revisit a decision. It's not as linear as it was not too long ago. Not too long ago, you could say, I have a problem. What's the data? What's the method? What does the method say? Make a decision. Well, by the time you do all that, the data has changed, the method has improved, and the decision isn't necessarily relevant anymore because the question changed. So, we can't be as linear as we are right now. We have to be much more recursive in our problem solving, in our thinking, in our opportunity grabbing, if you will. Yeah. If we're going to go after the gap is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the advantage is going to go to the analytically agile.
I love the way you say that. On that note, Anthony, you've been a fantastic guest today. It's always a delight to spend time with you. And again, thank you so much thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. We discussed a number of topics today. And I think that the key thing that we still come back to is putting data at the center and building that context makes that intelligent enterprise even more agile, even more fruitful, even more risk managers as well as opportunity finders. And this is something that's going to be there for a very long time. So Anthony, as always, thank you for your time, and God bless you and your family. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully in person very soon.
You as well. Amen to that.
Thank you.